morning, everybody. I don't know if you can see me clearly. I know I cannot see you, but welcome all. I am Jeffrey Hall. I'm co-chairman along with Jackie Sharp of the PSOJ Economic Policy Committee. And our work today is another in a series of what we call peer-to-peer conversations around driving economic growth in Jamaica. And just to put everybody on the same page, the Economic Policy Committee has hosted a number of sessions in the past. We've looked at the BPO business. In the wake of COVID, we spent a lot of time looking at the output gap with senior economists at the IDB. We looked at exchange rate gaps in the COVID scenario, and we also looked at the fiscal gap with the Minister of Finance. What's different today is that we've opened our conversations to the public, and for that, we're very grateful for the sponsorship and support of JMMB, our title sponsor, and Inter-American Development Bank. And our goal today is to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID and the response that we all should be considering as economic actors in Jamaica in relation to tourism and the business of tourism. As everybody knows, tourism accounts directly for 10.5% of GDP in a normal year and 30+% of GDP accounting for indirect impact. And we're going to do two conversations around tourism. The one today deals with people who are involved in the business of bringing people to Jamaica. And a subsequent and important conversation will be around what happens when people get here as it relates to the attractions business and the hotel business. But for this conversation, we have a very distinguished panel. Very pleased with the persons who have agreed to participate. I don't think we could have asked for better. From the Inter-American Development Bank, we have Olga Gomez Garcia. And as everybody knows, the Inter-American Development Bank is the single largest multilateral investor, contributor, supporter of Jamaica. And Olga Gomez Garcia is lead specialist on tourism. American Airlines, as you will know, is the lead airline as far as tourism arrivals into MBJ is concerned. And we have with us Christine Valls, Vice President, Latin America, Caribbean, and Florida Sales. Carnival Cruise Lines, I believe, has more ship calls than any other cruise arrival, cruise line from all its brands, which are quite several, into Jamaica. And we're very, very pleased to have McKenzie, who is the Vice President for Global Ports and Caribbean Government Relations for Caribbean Cruise Lines. All of these industries are highly competitive, and the views that they express, I'm sure, would also be to some extent expressed by their competitors. But we had to select the group with us today. And finally, Shane MUNROE, who is the Chief Executive Officer for MBJ, which of course is the largest airport in Jamaica and in the English-speaking Caribbean. So we have an excellent group of participants for our discussion. And what I wanted to do is to ask each of them for a perspective on how economic actors like ourselves here in Jamaica can support, advocate for the best possible return to business for Jamaica. What issues should we be considering? And what I'd like to do is begin with Olga Gomez Garcia, and ask her to set the context for us. And then following that, engage our industry participants in a discussion around their perspective. So what I want to say to Olga is, first of all, a little bit of a rhetorical question, which is, are you finding yourselves engaged with our peer countries in direct conversations around their turnaround plan and how they see themselves recovering from this crisis. And following that, I'd like to ask Olga to share a perspective on the depth and significance of the impact of COVID on tourism-dependent economies like ours, and then pivot very quickly to 2 to 3 of the most important measures that we need to take right now as a country and as economic actors, represented here by the PSOJ. What actions do we need to be considering or monitoring or supporting right now to give us the best chance of recovery? So Olga, I'd like to ask you to take 10 minutes and lay that case for us, and then we'll pivot to a discussion with our key industry leaders here today. At the end of an initial conversation with Christine, Marie, and Shane, I'm going to open the discussion to everybody present. In general, going forward, we will limit questions to PSOJ members, but as this is our first public forum, we thought we would make it wide open. And of course, there's always time to join the PSOJ in between this and our next session. I should let you know that we have some very important sessions coming up. We have one that will look at the outlook for digital transformation in Jamaica over the next 5 years with global leaders from our telecoms providers. And we're also planning, in addition to the one I mentioned on tourism, one that will look at comparative productivity in Jamaica with other countries globally. What makes us different in that dimension? Enough from me. Let me turn it over to Olga to help us to lay the groundwork for what we should be thinking about as economic actors. Olga?
Jeffrey, thank you so much, and thank you so much for this invitation. I'm very glad to be here today with this impressive panel. So definitely addressing your first question, yes, the bank is working really closely with our borrowing member countries. I'm currently working with nine out of the 26 borrowing member countries directly. And out of them, I think 5 of them, we are very, very much engaged in the conversations. We have technical cooperations and other type of projects that have been precisely designed in order to support these countries' recovery. And they are very much focused on rebuilding tourism and really reshaping the tourism industry and accompanying these countries in this process. So yes, I mean, we are in a very constant dialogue with these countries, and even if they are not necessarily instrument associated, we are supporting via our technical expertise that we have built over the years. Regarding your second question about the impact of this crisis, I think we all know as of now that this is unprecedented. I think we haven't seen a crisis like that for the tourism sector before. I think the numbers show it really clearly. Most of the institutionals, rather the UNWTO, ICAO, IATA, WTTC, even private sector institutions, when we are really taking a look to the numbers, the forecasts look, quite pessimistic in the first for this year. We were considering a decrease between 60 and 80%, as you all know. UNWTO data. Sorry, I think there is a background noise. I don't know if you are all hearing it. Maybe, I don't know, there's something there. Maybe a microphone that is open, I don't know.
I can hear you, Olga, but let me ask others who are not speaking to mute their microphones.
Sorry, thank you so much. So yes, I think the last UNWTO barometer and the monitoring of the crisis is showing a minus 70% in international tourism arrivals. As of now, real data, no forecast. We are only 1 quarter basically left out of data for this year, and let's see how it goes. I think definitely the vaccine and the news that we had this week is really, putting a little bit of hope. We are optimistic about that, but this crisis is unprecedented. I think it has got into the mind of all travelers. I think we all want, if we think about it's not only about the impact that it's going to have in terms of the for this year or the years to come. In the psyche of travelers, it's going to stay for a little while. So even with the vaccine, we have to see how it will be deployed and how it will get, again on track. But 2019 was a record year, so I don't think we are going to get there anytime soon. But we are hopeful and positive that we will start seeing some motion after this latest news. The only thing I want to bring to the table is that the impact is not only about this decrease that we are having, is that the tourism sector grow the GDP, for example, for Jamaica, tourism GDP for Jamaica, the compounded annual growth rate over the last 8 years, 2011, 2019, was nearly 5%. During that time, the tourism sector created for Jamaica, according to the WTTC, nearly 150,000 jobs. That is 18,400 jobs per year. So we have seen that as well worldwide. Again, WTTC data shows that their estimate is around 1 out of 4 jobs in the last 5 years were created directly or indirectly, by the tourism sector. So it's not only that, as per all estimates, we have millions of jobs at risk, is that we are not creating the jobs that we were expecting. So we have to look at this not only in terms of, we are about the impact is in terms of international tourist arrivals and in terms of tourism foreign visitor expenditure, like 20 times what we have seen in the financial crisis, which is quite impressive. But as well, we have to take a look that this will prevent all these job creation investments that we were considering. And if we take a look, it was a 60% increase during that time as well in terms of exports for Jamaica from the tourism sector, 3.5 billion in investment. So this is a very, very important industry. So we have to take care of this industry. In terms of, so that is just to say about the significance of this crisis and how it's affecting not only, obviously we are talking about microeconomic terms, but indicators, but this is really affecting a whole spectrum of tourism sector employees, and the workforce is very diverse workforce, from the very highly technological that might transfer to other industry, to some other most vulnerable, workers who might not be able to find necessarily a job so easily in other areas. Regarding your next question was a little bit about, the measures that we are seeing. So first of all, I think it will be very important to rebuild trust. I think that what we have seen is that trust is going to be fundamental. And that means that public sector and private sector coordination within all the line ministries in the public sector is essential. We have seen how, for example, quarantines have impacted very much tourism recovery in Europe. And, there are maybe other measures that are much more effective, and that might not be something that tourism ministries will be negotiating or dealing with, but maybe foreign affairs. So we have to see this from a very holistic perspective, and having that coordination within the public sector and the private sector as well. One thing that is super important is we are now operating under such level of uncertainty that anything that the government can do in order to reduce that uncertainty will be very important. What does it mean? That, really being very clear about the different phases, depending on how the pandemic is going to be evolving. What are the triggers, the key indicators that are going to, make us go from one phase to the other one or go back? How are we going to do the lockdowns? Is going to be reduced to certain very specific and targeted areas. It's going to be, broader areas. Are we going to as well do that for outbound markets? So having that clarity, I think, will help. Next, I think in the short term, obviously, firm survival and yes, helping the workforce, protecting the workforce and social protections measures for the workforce are going to be very important. And when we are talking about firm survival, so here we have not only a liquidity problem here, we have a solvency problem. So this is going to affect our revenue, it's going to affect our operating costs. Not only in the short term, it's not something that we are going to be solving, but I think all the travel sentiment analysis and everything that we have been seeing that we need to put in place from now onwards, even with the vaccine there, is really affecting businesses. So there are many areas that we can support when we are working with governments about restoring demand, trying to see if we can, being creative and look for new business lines, even if they are not. I mean, until the international, tourism and international tourist arrivals will, get back again. So trying to look for opportunities to help businesses to sustain those revenues and to have a little of critical mass in terms of being able to be there, as well some everything that is in terms of reducing the operating cost. Basically, the operating cost is very important. So we want to those businesses that do not have to wait until there is a very high level or a substantial level of demand there, that they can open early on so we can get the traction, building confidence as well. And then obviously everything that is related to financial instruments have been something that we have seen is very important. And then, last but not least, it's very important that we, address structural challenges. So we have been talking about the structural challenges for a real while, and I have only a few minutes there, but basically, in a market where you are going to be competing very hard for that demand, you have to be as competitive as it gets. And the problem is that lately we were able to be growing because the market size was growing and growing constantly for the last 9 years substantially. So we were able to grow even if we didn't have necessarily a very unique value proposition. But that, I think, is not going to really be the case. We need to adapt to the new trends that have been affected abruptly. So we were seeing those trends coming in terms of demand preference, etc. But I think this crisis has emphasized and has accelerated the change, and I think we have to account for that. We need to diversify our markets. We need to diversify our tourism product. We need to disconcentrate in terms of the concentration that we have in certain areas. The type of model we need to build up and trying to make a type of tourism that has a higher multiplier effect, that is going to really have a higher impact per tourist arrival, per international tourist arrival, or even building up as well, of course, our domestic market. So I think that is very substantial and is going to be very important. And I think I have addressed all your questions. If I have missed something, please let me know.
Thank you very much, Olga. And I certainly will create an opportunity for others to ask questions around the whole of government approach, as well as firm survival and diversification. I wanted to pivot now to Christine Valls at American Airlines. And obviously American Airlines has been testing or approaching a number of options for improving the confidence of air travel. And I just wanted you, Christine, to weigh in for this group of business people in Jamaica on the ideas that you think that we can champion that will increase the probability of relatively safe travel to Jamaica right away. Are there things that are top of mind for you from an airline industry perspective?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jeffrey, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. So in terms of increasing travel to Jamaica, I think for us, looking at it from an airline lens, the challenge that we've had is that we fly to many countries, and every country has a different requirement. And it has been very difficult for customers to navigate through exactly what it is that they need, and within what time period, because it's not only whether it's PCR tests or antigen tests, rapid tests, but it's also within a time period of, do you need a test within 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, do I quarantine, not quarantine? So for us, having a standardization of all of the islands in the Caribbean would really help push customers to first the Caribbean, right? And then once you're thinking, well, I want to go to sun, beach type of destination, then which one is going to facilitate that for me? Obviously for us, in the case of Jamaica, Jamaica is a very important destination for us. It's one of our largest ones. We'll be flying 15 flights a day come December. So it's really large. And if we can have some type of standardization where it comes to testing and protocols, that would really help.
Thank you very much, Christine. And I'm going to invite Shane MUNROE from MBJ to give a perspective. And I think at some point it would be useful, perhaps in the wider question and answer session, for us to take a view comparatively. And maybe Shane, you could help us with this a little bit now, and or Christine, on whether other countries are moving faster to build back tourism in a relatively safe way. You both are with multinational organizations, and so a comparative view could be useful. But Shane, if you were to take a view on the things that you see being important for business people to advocate for, but also what's your outlook for the future? When do you see this returning to normal? And that's a question that I'm going to circle back with on for others as well.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. And again, thanks for having me in this forum. Really appreciate it. And hello to all the fellow panelists. Well, to answer your first question about the outlook, it's very difficult to predict exactly when the recovery will happen. I think what we know for sure is that there are going to be certain triggers, and how we see it is almost akin to a V-shaped recovery. There being particular events that will bring a quick recovery in the short term, and then the economic factors will play out the latter part of the recovery. So, of course, things like the vaccine could have a major impact in terms of demand, but also if there are other measures that are put in place that make travel safe. Well, really the issue here is lack of confidence in travel, and passengers just not feeling safe to take a leisure journey and to go into vacation. So next year, we think that traffic could be perhaps 50 to 75% of 2019. But in terms of what that projection is going forward, a lot depends really on how it plays out with the health crisis, because that's really what this is. It's not an economic crisis. And also government decisions, right? Because a lot of impact with travel and demand is really based on quarantine measures and lockdowns and so on. So those direct government decisions have a direct impact on travel demand. With that said, though, I think there are things that we can do to incentivize passengers to travel. I saw a recent study and McKenzie and company, and there is latent demand. There are passengers who are willing to travel if a safe way or mechanisms can be put in place. Some of the things that we can do, and it was mentioned by the other panelists, are related to testing. We don't really have to wait until there's a vaccine to travel internationally, but the testing can help to remove the quarantines, because quarantines are what really impact demand. We saw that with the UK market, even for us, where the quarantine measures in the UK resulted in us really not losing the TUI flights, British Airways flights, and now with the lockdown measures, Virgin Atlantic no longer fly until earliest December. So here is where testing, and this is something that's being advocated by ICAO and by ACI and IATA, is to have global standards. And aviation works based on global standards. For some reason, it's absent in this crisis right now. But even after 9/11, what brought back travel was global standards that worked regardless of the state, regardless of the country. And so those consistent measures restored confidence, because passengers, regardless of where they've traveled, know that they expect a certain level of safety. And that's what's needed now. But absent that, I think the government has made a good move now that we're accepting these rapid tests, is that it offers a way to get around that quarantine requirement. The other thing, and certainly in the absence of global standards, is public health corridors. One of the things that we have to be prepared as a nation to do is to have bilateral arrangements. US, UK, Canada, they are our largest market, and we don't know how exactly it will play out. And because every country is putting in their own measures, we also have to be prepared to have that direct conversation, those bilateral discussions about meeting each other's health requirements, right, on either end of the journey, and creating a safe way for passengers to travel back and forth. So I think that is another measure that we can easily put in place that can really help to resuscitate travel. And of course, we have to make it seamless for the passenger. The less barriers passengers have to travel, they're going to have a greater incentive to travel, right? Now, I'm not suggesting exactly what's done in Mexico, where they don't have quarantine or testing requirements. But what we see there is where the barriers are removed. In Cancun, they are having 400,000 passengers, international passengers in October. We are at 70,000 passengers. So what we see is not that there isn't the demand, but if we do not make the entry requirements as seamless as possible and try to remove as many barriers as we can, then we're going to restrict the rebound or the growth in travel.
Thank you, Shane. And before I switch to Marie McKenzie, could you just restate the outlook you had for 21 relative to 2019? You'd mentioned a percentage number.
Right.
And you'd also given a comparative on Cancun. Is there a way that we could get a comparative view on how their numbers are trending relative to, say, 2019 at a headline level? Is that something you'd be able to share?
Sure. So in 2019, at least in Montego Bay, we had about 4.7 million passengers. So 50 to 75% of that is what we are looking at in 2021. What we are already seeing in some other destinations, mentioned Cancun, Los Cabos, and other destinations in Latin America and Caribbean, some are already at 70% in terms comparing to 2019, October 2020 to October 2019. And again, that indicates that there is some latent demand there. There is that demand to travel. And really, it's about making it easy for leisure travel to happen. Of course, there is the health situation. There's a balance to be achieved, right? So certainly we cannot ignore the health requirements and the need to maintain that. Because in fact, when you look at the UK market, one of the reasons we were not or removed from the travel corridor was because our case count per 100,000 per 7 day, that measure that they use, that metric, we had exceeded their threshold. So we were removed from their travel corridor. So it really requires a balanced approach. But again, measures such as health corridors, testing, and trying to make it as seamless as possible can really help resuscitate travel.
Before I bring in Marie, I got the fact that it's a balance and it supports Olga's whole of government approach. Christy, did you have a comment on that last set of discussions? And then after you, I'll pivot to Marie.
Absolutely, Jeffrey, thank you. And Shane, I echo your sentiment. What we have seen is we agree that there needs to be a balance, and we're not here to tell any government what they should be doing in terms of that balance. But our numbers show that in the places where there is no testing, customers are willing to travel. So our industry passengers, when you look at a place like Cancun, Cancun's industry passengers are up 6% year over year. Dominican Republic, as soon as they did away with their testing requirement, their numbers went up. They are at a 27% negative year over year. But then when we look at the CARICOM Islands, we know what people want to come to the sunshine, right? What we're calling the sunshine destinations. We are down 55% in the CARICOM destinations. Recently, last week, Colombia did away with their requirement, and 3 weeks ago, Costa Rica did away with their testing requirement. And we are already seeing an uptake of passengers veering over to those destinations. Again, we're not suggesting it's not our call, right? But that is what the numbers are showing. We have a group of passengers. From an airline perspective, our business is divided by, obviously we have our leisure customers and we have our corporate customers and we have our VFR customers. We have a group of leisure customers that do want to travel. And the majority of the travel that they want to do is what we call short haul. So it is to the beaches, and it is to either the Floridas destinations or the Caribbeans or the Cancun. The countries that make it easier for a customer to come into the country are the ones that are really benefiting from the majority of that traffic. Although I will say that Jamaica is doing better than most in the Caribbean, by the way. Outside of Dominican Republic and Punta Cana, Jamaica is doing better. We're seeing now for September, October, we're at 50% of what we were last year. But again, that's better than most. Most are 73% down year over year. So I think that obviously the schedule that we're putting into the system and your hotels, our partners like Sandals being open, that always helps as well to bring the customers into the island. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much. I'm going to allow others to ask more on that if necessary. Marie, tell us a bit about the priorities for Carnival and your role at Carnival, and also whether Carnival has, Christine had mentioned this idea of short haul destinations. I don't know if there's a comparable perspective that differentiates Jamaica or, in the cruise space, but talk a bit about the priorities for Carnival for coming back.
Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey, and hello to everyone. It's always good to be on a panel in Jamaica as a Jamaican, and it's just really an honor for me to be here today. So thank you for the opportunity. I've been with Carnival for about 24 years. My role is focused on government and community related engagement across the Caribbean, working with about 27 countries in the region. Pre-COVID, we were moving approximately 10 million passengers throughout the region. I actually sit in the Carnival Corporation group. And what that means is there's the brand Carnival Cruise Line, which everyone knows, but we actually have 9 brands globally, 8 of which visit the Caribbean, and 8 of which have come into Jamaican ports over time. So I represent all of those brands, Princess, Holland, Costa, et cetera, that cruise the Caribbean waters. I'll say our priorities today is to start sailing. Since March 13, we have been, as an industry, we have paused our operations and working with the CDC, initially under a no sail order. They have since issued an update to the order, a conditional sail order, which we still need to work through with them on the requirements and what those mean for us to operate. But a priority is also working with our destination partners, such as Jamaica. In fact, since I've been here in Jamaica, I did have an opportunity to meet with government as well to start discussions there about what that might look like. Because even though the CDC governs how we operate out of the US, we have to be respectful of what's happening, of course, in the destinations and the expectations of government. But as Christine said, one of the challenges that we have seen so far, even though we have not started sailing, is the variation in requirements in websites for guests to complete for entry, et cetera, or have raised a level of concern for us. So I actually serve on a task force established by the FCCA, the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association, where all cruise lines are represented and also destination representatives. So it's chaired by Honorable Mia Mottley, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, and all destinations are represented. I understand Jamaica is plugged into that discussion as well. where one of the things that we have asked for as an industry is for the group of islands to really consider a standard set of guidelines under which we can operate. Because imagine a cruise with multiple destinations that we're going into on one itinerary, and every destination has a different set of requirements that we have to communicate to guests, that we have to follow, that we must meet. So we're hoping that when we do start operating, there's definitely clarity as to how we can get into destinations. And again, as Christine mentioned, we're very respectful of the fact that each country, they, as sovereign nations, they have the authority to set their own guidelines. But I can tell you operationally, it is challenging for us, and it is a deterrent for guests. I'll say, even though we're shut down and we have not earned any revenue at all since then, since March 13th, and we're still selling cruises. There's still demand. People do want to travel, and in fact, yesterday when they announced the vaccine, the market responded very favorably to cruise, because the idea that we could start cruising again, people respond. So we know that there is demand, and it's just a matter of figuring out how we can operate safely. And we're trying to have that discussion with the CDC, and also definitely with each of our destination partners. But as Christine said, it would really be helpful if we had a good understanding of some sort of unified approach to guidelines. If we could even get 80% there, it would be very helpful for us to operate in the region. You mentioned the short haul cruises, as Christine mentioned, short haul flights. Definitely coming out of COVID and restarting operations, we are considering a phased approach to restarting. For a couple of reasons. One, we want to make sure that the protocols that we have implemented work, okay? And in order to do that, we have to create what we consider a controlled environment. So yes, we are considering cruises to nowhere with employees, probably only. Then also, as a company, we do have some private island destinations and some developed ports that we have control over the experience within those ports. So initially, I could see in the short term, many of the cruises starting that way. However, our company did not grow and become the company that we are today, operating like that for the long term. So that is not our desire to operate in that manner. We absolutely hope to be able to expand beyond that very quickly, but we do consider it necessary in the short term, particularly to make sure that the protocols that we're building and establishing, not just as an industry, but specifically within our company as well, to make sure that those are working. And we would have to therefore control the environment. However, Jamaica is nicely positioned in what we consider a 5-day opportunity. When we look at a phased approach to cruises to nowhere, private islands, and then potentially expanding to a destination in the third phase, Jamaica is nicely positioned for that. And we do recognize that there is an active group here in Jamaica that has created a resilience corridor that's very focused already on land-based tourism operating safely. So that's attractive to us. We have pretty solid partners here as well that we know can assist with executing a good experience. So when we are ready, we will need to have that discussion. One of the things I can say that, Olga also mentioned is, in terms of restarting operations, while I'm looking for some set of standardized guidelines, getting specific clarity on specific requirements in each destination is so critical. So we would want to understand what are the expectations of government for us to get approval for entry. That needs to be very clear for us. In fact, our CEO spoke recently in another forum where he said that will be an absolute requirement for us to have a destination on the itinerary. If we don't have clarity, it creates a problem for us when We're selling a cruise with a destination on the itinerary, and then we have guests board. We're sailing to the destination, and we're still kind of working out what's needed for entry into the country. So it's very important that we understand what the government requirements will be for us to enter the island up front, and the sooner the better, because even though we've paused now, we're selling cruises for next year. So, you know, and if we have Jamaica on the itinerary, we want to be able to sell it and know that we can get into the destination, meeting the government's requirements. So understanding that sooner than later is a lot, it's definitely preferred. I can say this because we have gone through it. I know anything that we hear from government today in terms of requirements could change, because COVID has been changing our world on a daily basis. You know, sometimes we have one that, you know, Christine talked about, and Shane spoke of, you know, countries starting with testing requirements and removing testing requirements. So we understand that these things change. So even if we do get an update from government today, we recognize that when we do start sailing, it could change, but it's just important that we have some level of understanding before we can start operating in the region. And this task force that I'm on, where we are speaking with destination groups, it's been very, very helpful.
Thank you very much, Marie. And Marie, do you have any insights on, and this may be, you know, how long is a piece of string, but do you have a perspective on outlook at all, and likelihood of, or the timing of resumption, or is that just too early to say under the current circumstances?
It's definitely early to say. We don't know until we have really agreed on a set of protocols and how we will operate with the CDC out of the US. It is very hard to predict that timeline. And, you know, there's leaving the US, but we have to return to the US. And the CDC could likely, you know, dictate requirements of the destinations as well. So we suggest destinations are really following that process closely, because they could dictate for us with guest source out of the US, sailing out of the US, what happens when we do sail in order to return and, you know, return. So until we have that discussion, it's really, really hard to predict.
So business leaders, we have a couple of very clear themes across the board, and I want to open the discussion. The single biggest, clearest theme is that Jamaica has the potential to come back and come back strong, but a precondition for that is that we have clear, unambiguous, and ideally consistent standards and guidelines available to us. Obviously, nobody's telling the government what to do on this panel, but there are constraints around quarantines. And in addition to that, we have a duty to figure out the math on firm survival. And so let me open the floor for questions on any aspect of what's been said. And I also have a few questions of my own, but I'll hold those for the moment. I think you can either raise hands or simply unmute. We're going to try to get this right. And I have a question, I believe, from Janet Silvera and David Rose, but I'll take them in turn. I just wanted to again acknowledge, for good order, our sponsors on this, because we intend to have a number of forums like this. In particular, the IDB, led here in Jamaica by Therese Turner-Jones, and JMMB, I'm sure you're all familiar with. But let me take, I'm just going through the hands that are raised, and I have two to start with.
Thank you. I can go ahead, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. My question is to Shane MUNROE from the airport. I traveled to Montego Bay last week, Thursday, and it was chaos in the airport in relation to the fact that the airport has been taken over by the MOH. And I'm just curious to find out what, if anything at all, the government plans to do about the situation at Sangster, whether or not Mr. MUNROE will be able to get the government out of his airport and have them on the outside instead of in the immigration hall. That is my first question.
Thank you very much. And what we're trying to do in the discussion, and that's a very, very helpful question, is to try to understand the policy environment that works best. And so, Shane, I don't know if you have any insights that you want to share with us on that. And then following that, I want to invite Olga to give a comment on all that she's heard thus far.
Yeah, sure. So, well, one of the things that we have seen as the traffic continues to increase is a greater demand on the resources of the Ministry of Health. Firstly, we have to say that the Ministry of Health has been doing overall a very good job of controlling the pandemic. The issue really is that as volume grows of passengers, then we're going to have longer wait times if we can't get that processing time down and those resources there to handle the increase in traffic. What's happening now to address that is that we have been working with various stakeholders on improvements and lobbying for improvements at the highest level in the country. Some of those measures we have seen some improvements. The developers of the Jam COVID application working with the OPM office as well in terms of process improvements and with MOH in terms of having more persons on the ground. So we have seen some improvements there with that. I would say it's a work in progress. We are certainly not happy with where it is yet, but at the same time, it is a collaborative effort with all stakeholders. This approach we have had from the beginning to manage this crisis, and that will continue. But what I can say is that the resources at the highest level have been devoted from the various agencies to address it.
Olga, the reason I wanted to call on you is a couple of things. One is Shane's point, which is that as the arrivals increase, the complexity and the challenges of managing the process increase. But you had been advocating in your opening remarks for a kind of a whole of government approach. So obviously, it's nothing that Shane can do that will manage the health issues on the ground at the airport. That's going to be a Ministry of Health issue, and we can go on and on. What are you seeing among our peers in terms of whole of government approaches? Are people appointing czars to deal with coming back from a tourism perspective? Are they leaving it to individual ministries? What is there some benchmark that we should be looking towards?
Thank you for the question. I think most governments, and I think including the Jamaican government, are trying to get a multi, ministry approach, and they are really trying to put task forces to coordinate, the different policy measures and the different initiatives. I think this is, as we said, it's unprecedented. So it's going to be a challenge, and there is going to take us a little time to be able to be really as efficient as we all would like. And I think technology is going to play a big part on it. And I think as well, we have to think about training and many other measures, how we can help to put this in place and really do it in a way that you will not be waiting in line for 2 hours in order to pass immigration, and you are concerned that you might get the virus right there. So I think it's not only about that we also want to go very smoothly through immigration always, but specifically in this type of situation is even more crucial. So I think, again, the challenge is going to be that those that already have a competitive advantage technology-wise and in terms of, having trained and have the resources to train, a large number of workers, we're going to see that can make a difference. So I think these are things that we should consider. So not only from a health perspective, obviously, but how do we implement and as well bring, again, the private sector experience here. We have seen, for example, there are some voices that in some countries that they have bring to the table people who have a lot of experience from the private sector in terms of logistics and deployment of a certain type of measures might have helped to precisely make these things more efficient. We are all together in this, and we really need to coordinate. And as I said before, not only among the different levels of government, but as well with the private sector. And I think what will be crucial and fundamental is identifying the root causes of those bottlenecks and really putting in place the measures that are associated to precisely that. Efficiency and effectiveness of the measures that we are identifying is much more important than ever. We are in a situation where we need more resources, and we are really facing a decrease in revenues, tremendous increase in revenue. So we really have to try to test the development effectiveness, the efficiency of that public effectiveness of that public policy ex ante at entry. Trying to really do that and see what others are doing, have benchmarking analysis, learn from others, iteration. So I think this is very important. Thank you.
And Olga, before you move, you had mentioned this question of firm survival, and that it's not just a liquidity issue anymore, it may also be a solvency issue. Are other countries doing things more aggressively to ensure firm survival? You've mentioned the importance of a private sector participation. Are there things we should be thinking about that ensures that we have a strong private sector coming out of this?
So can you repeat the last part of your statement regarding private sector participation? Sorry, broke out a little bit.
Well, it really is a question of, you'd mentioned firm survival. I'm just wondering whether the IDB is seeing any types of initiatives that are supporting firm survival at the government level or at the financial institution level within countries.
Yes, sorry, I missed that part. Thank you. Yes, definitely. So as I said before, first of all, we have seen some initiatives in terms to restore demand. So for many years, we have really big challenges in terms to really know with a good level of granularity the different market segments and having a market segmentation as you might have in other industries from a destination perspective. So I think really one very important aspect have been trying to revamp and make more, stronger our market intelligence capacities in the different destinations. Really trying to assess. We have seen that the visitors, friends and family segment has been very resilient. And then we have seen, so we really need to see how we are going to target who we want to attract. And as well, what are the needs that we are going to be able to fulfill? So having that market intelligence first, and really the government, I see that, for example, the statistics data is like a semi-public good. We really need to be able to help those businesses that might not have the capacity as the very successful and important companies that we have here on the table to build their own market, market intelligence, very strong departments to be able to participate on that and reduce the knowledge gap in that sense, and that they are being able to position themselves as well adequately towards those markets. Clearly, what I have seen that has had a very important impact is everything that is related, especially in Europe, that have very strong social protection measures, but in other countries as well, specific executive agreements or changes in the regulation that will prevent massive layoffs, in the sense that they are trying to collaborate to maintain, that workforce in place, and helping those companies to finance rather the social contributions or maybe part of their even salaries, etc. And that I think has been helping, that we don't face massive layoffs, and that as well the liabilities that might represent for some companies depending on the market that you're operating. We have seen that as well, that there have been moratoriums in terms of the financial liabilities, in terms of even trying to reduce energy costs. So a very broad spectrum of measures trying to reduce operating costs for companies. And then, of course, financial instruments. We have seen government guarantees, credit lines, etc., that have been just push into the financial markets, trying from a government perspective to support that we are going to be able to help those firms to refinance their loans, to increase, the time they have in order to repay those loans, etc., etc. And yes, so that is only part of them. Sorry, no, go ahead.
Thanks. Before Christine, I wanted to give you an opportunity to weigh in on the airport experience question and any other aspect of what's been said thus far.
Thank you, Jeffrey. You must have been reading my mind, right? So look, to address the question that was posed, first let me say that the chaos that you're seeing at MBJ is not unique to MBJ. It's happening all across the system. And it's happening because, and I'll talk to you about our operation. For us, we have now ticket agents, gate agents who have had to become experts in reading lab results, right? It's just not something that is sustainable, and particularly for the airlines where our systems are set up with spokes and hubs, and you have a flight that is maybe coming out of Miami going to Montego Bay that has customers coming from a diverse group of destinations or originations in the United States. And then you have these agents who are checking in customers for a vast number of destinations, and trying to figure out, number one, what is the requirement? And number two, if the lab results or the requirements that they have are valid. We're seeing that. So we're seeing that on the outbound as well as on the inbound. So when the customer is arriving into your destination, now the folks in country have to figure out and become experts in reading all of these test results that are coming from different labs, right? So it's very, very complex. We think that there is an opportunity, like Olga was mentioning, an opportunity to focus on technology and develop what we're calling a digital medical wallet that will allow, number one, the operation from an airline perspective to flow, and for folks not to miss their connections or miss their flights because we're trying to decipher their requirements. And in conjunction with the country, the same type of a system where if the country is connected to this technology, then we could potentially make the process of arrival also faster. We are actually in talks with the Jamaican government. We've been dealing with Ambassador Marks and Minister Bartlett and Minister Tufton on this initiative, and hopefully Jamaica will be our test run for this initiative. But we really think that trying to help the countries also, when all of this influx of customers are coming in, and helping that process be a little more streamlined is going to help, because come December, everybody's going to be adding flights, right? So what MBJ is experiencing today is just 1% of what's coming in the next couple of weeks. So if we can get this done quickly, I think it'll help everybody.
Thanks, Christine. Shane, I'm mindful that you had an 11 o'clock hard stop for other reasons, and I definitely wanted to thank you for your participation. I do want to continue the discussion, but I wanted to thank you, and it's important to the private sector in Jamaica that you know, as a global investor or representative of a global investor group, that we stand ready to support the process. But I have a question from Maya Waldron.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much to the panel for your thoughts so far. I have traveled, I think, on 2 occasions, both to the US and within CARICOM, and absolutely the inconsistency of requirements and various different experiences on different operators from an airline perspective and different port destinations has been bewildering, to say the least. So I wanted to support the comment that we need things that are more consistent, that there are global standards that are clear, and that as much as possible, though the changes to those are less frequent, or at least scheduled in quarterly batches or what have you, because the constant changing of requirements can also be very difficult for a traveler. My question is really to Olga in terms of best practices. So there are obviously many countries doing this in different ways in terms of different kinds of measures based on different criteria. So measures based on the risk of country of origin, measures based on sort of your economic tourist value or economic value to the destination, different kind of approaches in terms of communication of the protocols, different kinds of practices around the use of digital. And I wondered if you could reflect a little bit on some of the best practices that maybe the IDB has seen in the Americas that perhaps could be a good guideline for Jamaica to look at. And it may be different, responses in terms of those different categories, but where could we look to find best practices to be able to have a better experience for the Jamaican traveler?
Or the global traveler.
Or the global traveler to Jamaica, rather.
Thank you very much for your question. I think to be totally honest, I think the problem that we have is that we will really need, in order to evaluate the effectiveness of the different measures, we are still not able to do so because there are so many confounding factors we don't have. I mean, we really would like to do it. Unfortunately, like most of the things, we can say as of now with certain level of certainty that, for example, quarantines killed the tourism. And I think there is kind of an agreement on that. That is it's not that they kill it, maybe I shouldn't have used that word, but that basically they have a very tremendous impact. And we have seen that it's not necessarily, such an effective measure, right? So that we can know. In terms of the risk of country of origin, it depends because they are all these type of measures, they are put together in a combination with others. So you might have a risk of country of origin, and then you decide that, people who are nationals can travel, or then you decide that, yes, because of this risk, they have to do extra requirements in terms of testing. And it depends if you are supporting that test deployment and you are subsidizing that test versus if you are not. So I think, unfortunately, to really have a clear view, and the IDB, I'm sure we will be analyzing this, and we are just gathering the data to see, and this is an incredible learning experience, unfortunately, for future pandemics. But as of now, I think there is a very high level of uncertainty. I mean, we know from where we are seeing that, for example, quarantines do not work. We see when we were talking before about testing, yes, the numbers might show that if we remove testing, and when we were talking about that balance, what happens then? And I was trying on the spot to see some research papers about it, but what happens then with the pandemic evolution in those destinations, right? If you remove that barrier. But what if what is preventing the test by itself is not necessarily the barrier, but what we have seen is that is the cost of the test, or that you don't have accessibility to that test. So there are so many factors that we are all in this analyzing, with the governments, with the private sector. But as of yet, unfortunately, there is no playbook that we can say we have these best practices, this is a silver bullet. I think we were mentioning before, technology is super important, that we have technology all across. And this is it sounds very general, but I think we have to look really, and so I will not say only technology, but as well, when we do something, we really have to, and there is a lot of pressure that we put in place, measures very quickly, because obviously we need to deal with this. This is such an urgent situation, but we really to sometimes step back and see, evaluate all the different alternatives, and doing some type of analysis. This is the type of very different, the balance that we need. You need to act quick, but you need as well to think how you're going to act, because if you put in place something that is really not going to help, you better don't put it in place, and then you ended up spending much more time that, it's not going to be effective, and you're going to be lagging behind. So there is always this balance. I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer for you in terms of telling you this is the road.
I think you were very clear at the headline level, which is a safer approach to quarantines, a more convenient approach to testing, and then kind of unified standards. And those are huge asks for all of us to consider. What I wanted to do was to invite Stefan Wright to weigh in on the question. And on those big themes that you just mentioned, Olga, once Stefan has asked his question, I'll invite Marie and Christine if they have a perspective as well on best practices. Stefan?
Thanks, Jeffrey. And just to say, I'm with IDB Invest, which is the private sector arm of the IDB group. And just to follow up on some of the comments Olga made. So we are working with the private sector in the region to try and bring them back online, really in two ways. I think the first way is working with private sector interests. These are groups of hotels in terms of providing them with liquidity facilities, so working capital facilities. Really, as we all know, this is unprecedented. The clients today are facing serious cash shortfalls and have had to lay off people and do things that they never ever want to do and never want to see again. So we're there to support them in providing working capital facilities, and we're working through a number of those with regional players right across the Caribbean. And then secondly, we're also working with governments and the private sector generally to try and create some facilities which would be available to all private sector clients in those countries. These are a lot more difficult to structure and execute because in many cases we're talking about a government guarantee or a limited government guarantee. We need the local banks to participate as well because we're really providing them with some kind of a partial credit guarantee. And then, obviously the customers, the hotels themselves have to participate as well. So we're working, on a number of those throughout the region, but as I say, it's taking a little while to make progress. But we are here on the private sector side, supporting hotels and other entities in the region. The question I had, and unfortunately Shane had to go, but I think it's just as relevant for Christine, is really trying to look at or asking the question, when do you think we'll get back to 2019? That's really the magic numbers for us. I think Shane had mentioned 2021 being 50% occupancy. We got some very good news this week from Pfizer about a vaccine, and I see Carnival stock went up 40% within hours or minutes really of that news coming out. So people are really looking forward to some good news. And I did hear Christine mentioned before that once you sort of remove the protocols and the testing, that the traffic comes back. So what I'm trying to figure out is you put all of that into a mix, you have a vaccine, the protocols are removed, we're on to 2021 or 22, I'm trying to understand from their perspective, when do we get back to 2019 and what impact you think a vaccine will have on 2021.
Okay. Thanks, Stefan. Before we pivot to the outlook and getting back to normal, I just wanted to pick up on your first question around private sector support investment. And I wanted to ask Marie, when you look globally on behalf of Carnival Cruise Lines or Carnival Corporation, I should say, what's your appetite for private sector engagement and how do you see this developing as you look forward? I'm sure you've had an active relationship with the Port Authority and with very direct cruise interests. But for a group like this of business leaders across Jamaica, is there something we should be thinking about looking forward as to how we can be best in class in forging a long-term relationship with large-scale global cruise operators, for example?
So, Jeffrey, as I mentioned, in Jamaica, we have about 6 of our brands, I believe, coming here, 6 of the 9. And AIDA, our German brand, home ports out of Montego Bay, for example. And home port operations bring a whole set of economic activity beyond the tour operators and the ports. It's a port, yes, but in terms of the charter flights coming in.
¿En el cuál? ¿En el de Bilbao?
I think some mic is on.
We could all mute. It'd be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so we need baggage handling services. We need transportation services for guests flying in to get on the ship, for guests flying out to get off the ship. We need supplies out of Montego Bay as well. So there's certain supplies and fuel that we need to get for the ship when it home ports out of a particular port. In total, I think we represent about 40% of the capacity coming to Jamaica in 2019. Looking forward, I don't see us getting to that capacity in 21 immediately because we will have a measured return to business. We just have to in a COVID world, vaccine or no vaccine. We, as a company, if you're following us as a public company, there's a lot of information available on the Carnival Corporation Investor Relations site, where on October 8th, we reported, we gave a business update and we talked about the fact that we are selling ships. So we are selling or scrapping total. Diana Gomez, I think, who needs to mute her mic. Yeah, so they're ships that, honestly, these are ships that we had intended to either retire or sell over time, that are less efficient ships. So we have committed to a total of 18 that we're getting rid of. And what does that mean for the region or for Jamaica? These are smaller ships that we have gotten rid of that were less efficient. And we have slowed the delivery of our new builds, which are larger ships. But larger ships do bring more guests, but we could potentially see less calls because we have less ships. So, and with a measured return to operation, I think you won't see 2019 capacity, in the immediate return in 21 for sure. It's just the nature of COVID. So to say when we'll be back at those levels, it's a little unpredictable as well at this time. But we continue to take delivery of our ships, even though we're getting rid of some ships, because again, it's just more efficient, more modern ships that we're taking on. And some of those are coming to the Caribbean region, and I would expect some of those would be coming to Jamaica as well. But over time, it will take some time, as it relates to our broader engagement with the private sector. While we sell tours as a company, there's a perception out there that we hold all the business, we sell all the tours, we're in control completely of what tours guests go on. Actually, I double checked with our team today, and 35% of the guests on our ship actually purchase a tour from us. What does that say to Jamaica? It says 65%, it's all yours, meaning some of these guests are walking off the ship, they're going to a taxi, they're going on a bus, they're going walking. And what I've shared with many destinations is the importance of also paying attention to that experience of those 65%. And again, some people do decide to stay on the ship. So let's say 10% stays on the ship, right? You still have 55% getting off. Now, what I explained to many destinations is that group is also very important to pay attention to. The partners that we work with, they take the time to understand our business. They make investments to make sure that they deliver a certain level of experience as well. So typically what we have found is when people rate a cruise, the higher ratings come from guests who have purchased tours from us. And it's not because others had a bad experience. But what we do with our partners in the destination is we are responsible for every touch point of that guest. So we make sure that they have a complete experience. So you ask, what can the private sector do? Recognize that there are some guests that we don't sell tours to, that do get off the ship, that do want to experience Jamaica. And it's important that they pay attention to that experience as well. It's critically important to get a total rating for Jamaica. In fact, I have spoken in the past about some of the challenges around what many refer to as harassment getting off the ships. But, I've shared with some of my colleagues in the company, they're not really trying to harass our guests. It's just people trying to make money, just trying to survive. And they see opportunities when they see guests get off the ship. But me as a Jamaican, when I get off the ship and 6, 7 taxi operators approach me and say, come into my taxi, or I go into a market and multiple people approach me, come into my stall, I'm not intimidated by that. But many times, some of our guests that get off a ship, and if they're approached by too many people at the same time, it definitely impacts the experience. So pay attention to these guests that aren't purchasing tours from us, that choose to experience our island on their own. It is very important that we're paying attention to the touch point of those guests. I can tell you, being here, I was in Montego Bay and I was walking on Bottom Road, shopping with a colleague of mine from Carnival. And I can tell you I had a great experience. Many of the shops along there, the ladies said, please, can you visit? They were very polite. They asked us to come in. They weren't aggressive about it. And in fact, they kept saying, I said, please. I can tell that they went through some level of training or some sort of, because they were all consistently engaging us in a certain manner. And it was a very pleasant experience. So I'm hoping, I've not gotten off a ship in Jamaica recently. I'm hoping that, that has translated to the debark experience as well in Ocho Rios, in Montego Bay, in those ports when people are walking off on their own. But it's so important that we understand that Carnival, as a company, we don't sell all the tours. We don't control the entire experience in Jamaica. Jamaica does. Jamaica does. And we have to pay attention to those guests that are just walking off a ship as well.
Thank you very much, Marie. That was very comprehensive. What I want to do is take 2 more questions and then take a wrap up that touches very much on the point that Stefan raised around outlook. So I have 2 more questions, one from David Rose and then Carol Straw. I'll take them both now, and then I'll ask our panelists for a response on all of those and anything else, and then we'll close off. And I really am valuing the session. David?
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall. Morning. This question is directed to Olga, but others can chime in if anything. So right now we're seeing basically where, as the IDB has mentioned not too long ago, Ms. Gomez, I should say, where there is a quote-unquote structuring or support for certain operators or entities right now to ensure that they can survive to the next period. But what I wanted to ask was, has the IDB been working in such a way to work with the private sector to create funds to allow for participation by private investors to, I would say, support those operators? Because, as you said, most of the tourism, as you said, tourism itself is mainly supported by indirect operations. So you're working directly with operators who are in the industry directly, but it's about those who are not necessarily in the sector as well, because Carnival, a while ago mentioned, they source some of their older operations, and I think that's going to potentially affect the revival of tourism. So my question is just about how are you guys working in terms of other partners to see how best you can, I should say, insulate, but try and support them to make sure that when tourism gets back online.
That's a hugely important question, that of how the investment opportunities play out over the next year or 2, in the very near term. Let me just take Carol's question and open it to the panel for answers on all questions.
Okay, so thank you, Jeffrey. My question has more to do with the linkages, understanding, of course, the need to, have standards across the board, the need to pivot, so to speak. There's also the opportunity to build local linkages. So to Carnival, to American Airlines, and to anybody else who wants to chime in, what can we do to increase provisions or supplies from the local industry into your supply chain, given that, of course, the same issues or standards will apply across the board. How can we, change things or motivate persons in a way that they can see that tourism really benefits everyone? I think the COVID-19 experience, for example, has shown just how wide and deep the tentacles of tourism go. So what can we do to make people own this more and recognize that they're truly a part of this chain and take advantage of some of these opportunities that could present themselves?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just go quickly to those two questions, one on investment and one on product diversification, differentiation, and involvement by local participants. Olga, any words on that you wanted to share?
Sure, definitely. So as you know, the IDB has, the IDB group is composed by the IDB, which is the public sector. Then we have IDB Invest and IDB Lab. So we work not only first, as I am from IDB public sector, but I work closely with my colleagues in IDB Invest and IDB Lab, Stefan was mentioning. So what we do in terms of promoting investment, first of all, we are trying, and in terms of financial instruments, we are working with the government, and not only the government, but as well the private sector, private banks, but as well operators. So we have a very comprehensive approach. We are trying to find ways to really, we were quickly reacting to this. IDB Invest, Stefan indeed was leading one initiative, trying to put together an instrument, and a specific new instrument with, guarantees that it was something in partnership with the public sector and the private sector branch of the IDB. We put together as well an IDB Lab Challenge. It's our innovation and kind of more smaller side, but very tech-oriented and innovative-oriented, that was trying to, a challenge for the tourism industry, trying to provide some resources for, those firms that they were providing very important innovation and investments for the sector, and as well that we have externalities given this crisis. But what we are currently working with the Jamaican government in a new tourism strategy 2030. One big part of it is entrepreneurship and investment. So we are doing all the assessments, and in terms as well of product diversification, we are doing a destination competitive analysis. We are mainstreaming sustainability, climate change, but it's a very much a productive focus that we are having, as well helping to understand very well demand trends, and as well how those demands relate with the current supply that Jamaica has, and not only in terms of attractions, but as well in terms of the productive sector. And then what are the bottlenecks for those investments and for that growth? And we are taking a close look to the multiplier effect that the tourism in Jamaica has, that we know is less than the global average, less than as well the Latin American and Caribbean region, even if, we know there is room for improvement. And what we are doing is that we are with the government, we are currently in the execution of all the studies that will provide us more precise identification of how we can tackle this. One very important contributor, I think we have to say, is a structural challenge for many countries, precisely in Latin America and the Caribbean, and some Caribbean countries, which is violent crime, and that prevents, we have seen, the development of different type of tourism products, and that is something that is a major challenge, but there are ways to overcome and trying to mitigate that. And as well, it's very important that we build, the capacity. When we talk about building capacity, we think a lot about the workers, but we have to think about as well the entrepreneurship. And when we are talking about, this is a very complex industry, there is simultaneously demand and consumption. There are all these revenue management, all these yield management structures that have been completely shaken off, and that it is a tsunami that just happened. And so we will really try to think how we are going to make all those firms productive, how they can have the digitalization, financial inclusion, how we are going to be able to promote safer structures of payments, that how we can profit that in terms of intelligence for the different market segments. So we are really having a very comprehensive approach. We are in the discussions, we are building this strategy, and then we have specific projects. I don't know if Stefan wants to complement on that, because he's really working closely with the operators. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, what we're going to do is we'll create another opportunity to look very closely at the question of firm survival and finance. And this is something that we definitely saw as being a part of a discussion with local and global tour operators in Jamaica and hotel operators in Jamaica. And so given the appetite for that discussion, we'll definitely make sure that it's a priority. What I wanted to do now is offer Maria and Christine any final words, and then close off with a quick statement about where we think we are with the insights given. Christine?
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to address one of the questions that came with regards to where we would be in the next 2 years. So look, I have good news and maybe not so good news. All right. And from a good news perspective is that the Caribbean and Florida is where folks want to go, and it's where we are putting our efforts. We have always had a long-standing relationship with Jamaica and with the Caribbean. And the good news is that we will have schedule, we will have airplanes, and with the airplanes coming into the island, then the opportunity is there to then bring the customers, right? Now, in terms of the customers, we do believe that the Caribbean and these short haul destinations will recover faster than our long haul network. And the Caribbean and Jamaica will have 100% of its year-over-year schedule versus our long haul or even our domestic network will be around 50% of it. So that is good news in terms of we have the opportunity to bring the customers into the island. Now, the challenge, and like we've all mentioned here, is the process, streamlining the process, ensuring that people are not confused, ensuring that they're safe while they're there. Those are things that I think all of us, private sector, can help put together so customers feel safe coming back to Jamaica. So in terms of time frame, like Olga mentioned, it'll be sooner for the Caribbean, it'll be sooner for Jamaica. Hard to tell whether it'll be 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, or 3 or 4 years. We think for the airline in general, it'll take 3 to 4 years to be back where we were in 2019. But I do believe that it'll be faster for the Caribbean, faster for Jamaica.
Thank you. Marie?
Thanks.
Jeffrey, I'd like to close in saying that I do believe there is an active team here in Jamaica really trying to bring tourism back safely. They have been very proactive about engaging us, reaching out to us, to talk to us. And I think that's important. And relative to other destinations, I can tell you that the group here in Jamaica has been very, very active. And it's been helpful for us. The question on linkages, I'll say this, I don't have specific data as to how much we're sourcing out of Jamaica as a corporation at this time. But what I will say is there are 2 main challenges I've heard about sourcing from the Caribbean in general. And one is consistency in quality and in quantity. So meaning we need a level of consistency in terms of anything that we agree to purchase. It must be consistently delivered at a certain level of quality and definitely in the quantities that we need. And I've been told we have had that sort of challenge primarily out of the Caribbean. So I can't say that that's definitely the case for Jamaica, but I'm open to working to understand that further. And I know, again, the group here that's been focused on linkages, because there's a group that's been looking at that with the industry. They have reached out to engage with us on that dialogue. It's just, we've been so focused on just restarting operations generally that we haven't gotten into the details that I would like to get into. So I didn't want to ignore that question. But last but not least, Jamaica is a key destination for us as a company. Jamaica is a brand by itself, just the word Jamaica. In fact, I have many people ask me if Dominica is in Jamaica. They hear of an island and a place in the Caribbean and everybody knows Jamaica. So for us as a company, it is definitely one of those destinations that we want to market and we want to sell and we want to visit and take our guests to. But I would also like to say, similar to Christine, what's the challenge? It's in this post-COVID world or COVID world, you know, to tell you when we'll be here, precisely when, and how we'll be operating, I don't have the answer today. So if it's seen that we have started cruising and we're only going to the private islands, or we're only doing our developed ports, please do not look at that as an indicator of where we want to be in the long term. We're simply doing that in the initial phase to get our operations going and to test the protocols that we would have implemented and agreed to with the CDC. But I can assure you, like I said, we had meetings with government while we've been here. And the reason for doing that is because Jamaica is a critical destination and a critical partner to us.
Thank you very much. Marie, thank you. Shane, Olga, and Christina, I really appreciate the time you spent with us. I think the messages and insights were clear. The people on this call, in their separate capacities, certainly have the opportunity to advance the insights shared. And to our sponsors, JMMB and IDB, we appreciate your input as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.